Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Blood pounded against the inside of Julian's skull, a frantic, wet rhythm that drowned out the rain lashing against the window pane, but it couldn't drown out the sound of the lock picking, scratch, click, scratch, echoing from the other side of his apartment door. Julian Vane was a creature of calculated avoidance, an architectural archivist who lived his life in the quiet margins of society. But tonight, the margins were closing in. He stood in the center of his dimly lit living room, his breath hitching in ragged gasps, staring at the brass knob as it began to turn, a slow, metallic rotation that signaled the end of his sanity. For weeks, the shadow had followed him. A faceless figure in a gray hoodie, leaving dead flowers and Polaroids of Julian sleeping on his doorstep. But the police had called it a civil matter without concrete threats. Now the threat was turning the handle. Terror, cold and absolute, severed the paralysis holding Julian's feet to the floorboards. He didn't think. His body simply rejected the inevitability of what was coming through that door. He bolted. Not toward the bedroom, not toward the fire escape, but toward the only other variable on the 4th floor. He ripped his front door open, the sudden motion startling the figure hunched over his lock. A man with pale, wet skin and eyes that widened in manic delight, and Julian threw himself across the narrow hallway. He slammed his body against the solid oak of apartment 4B. He didn't knock. He hammered his fists against the wood, a frantic, desperate rhythm. "Please!" he screamed, his voice cracking, humiliated tears hot on his face. "Please, he's here. Open the door." Behind him, the stalker wasn't running away. He was laughing. A low, wet chuckle. "Julian, don't be rude." The footsteps on the hallway carpet were heavy, deliberate. Julian squeezed his eyes shut, his forehead resting against the wood of 4B, bracing for the grab, the knife, the end. The door didn't open. It vanished. Julian fell forward, stumbling into a wall of solid heat. He was caught, not by the floor, but by a hand large enough to crush his trachea, gripping the front of his sweater to stabilize him. Julian looked up, and up. Silas Thorne filled the doorway like an inevitable natural disaster. He was well over 6'6", a monolith of corded muscle and violent tattoos that crept up his neck like black ivy. He was shirtless, wearing low-slung gray sweatpants, his skin mapped with the white ridges of old knife scars. His eyes were the color of gunmetal, cold and utterly devoid of sleep, staring down at Julian with an expression that wasn't annoyance, but something sharper. Predatory curiosity. "The hell is this?" Silas's voice was a deep rumble that vibrated through Julian's chest. He's right there," Julian gasped, pointing a trembling finger back toward the hallway. "Please, just let me in. I'll do anything. Just let me stay." Silas looked over Julian's shoulder. The hallway was empty. The gray hoodied figure had vanished the moment the giant had appeared, scurrying back into the shadows of the stairwell like a roach fleeing sudden light. Silas looked back down at Julian. The massive man didn't step aside. He leaned down, his face inches from Julian's, smelling of sandalwood and expensive bourbon. The air pressure seemed to drop. "You're the quiet one from Fora," Silas murmured. "The one who scurries." "Please," Julian whispered, his legs giving out. "I can't go back in there." Silas studied him for a heartbeat that lasted an eternity. Then, a slow, dark smirk ghosted across his lips. It wasn't a smile of kindness. It was the look of a dragon finding a stray lamb at the mouth of its cave. "Anything?" Silas repeated Julian's earlier plea, testing the weight of the word. Julian nodded frantically. Silas stepped back and pulled Julian inside, closing the door with a finality that echoed like a prison cell slamming shut. "Careful what you offer, little mouse. I collect on my debts." The interior of apartment 4B was nothing like the chaotic clutter of Julian's home. It was stark, minimalist, and expensive. The furniture was black leather and chrome, the lighting severe. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a staging ground. There were no personal photos, Only a wall of monitors displaying various security feeds. Not of the building, but of street corners, shipping docks, and back alleys across the city. Julian stood by the door, dripping rainwater onto the pristine hardwood, shivering violently. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving him nauseous. Silas walked to a wet bar in the corner, the muscles of his back shifting like tectonic plates under his skin. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass and walked back, forcing it into Julian's hand. "Drink," Silas commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. Julian obeyed, the alcohol burning a path down his throat, shocking his system into a momentary calm. He coughed, wiping his mouth. "Thank you. I can call the police now. I just needed to get away." "The police won't come in time," Silas said, leaning against a black marble pillar, crossing his massive arms. "And if they do, they won't find him. Your friend out there knows how to disappear. I watched him bypass the lobby security in under 10 seconds on the feeds." Julian froze. "You saw him? You saw him and didn't help." "I don't work for free," Silas said simply. "And I don't get involved in domestic squabbles unless invited." "It's not domestic. I don't know him." Julian's voice rose, hysteria bubbling up again. "He's been following me for months. He leaves things. Dead things." Silas tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. The apathy in his gaze shifted, replaced by a glint of recognition. Stalkers are messy. They escalate. Tonight was the breach. Next comes the abduction. Then the disposal. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. I have to go to a hotel." "He'll follow you," Silas said, pushing off the pillar and stalking toward Julian. He moved with a terrifying grace for a man of his size. He stopped only when he had Julian trapped between his body and the door. "He's likely waiting by the fire exit right now. You leave this apartment, you're his." "Then what do I do?" Julian whispered, looking up into the hard, angular face of his neighbor. Silas reached out, his hand engulfing Julian's shoulder. His thumb brushed against the pulse point on Julian's neck, feeling the frantic rabbit heart rhythm. "You begged to stay. So stay. Stay. Live here," Silas said. "Until I handle it." "Why?" Julian asked, his actuary brain trying to find the logic in the madness. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "I know you," Silas murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "I know you leave at 7:45 a.m. I know you sort your mail by color. I know you haven't slept in 3 weeks because I can hear you pacing through the wall." Silas leaned closer, his lips brushing Julian's ear. "And I know you're terrified of the world. I'm offering you a cage where nothing can hurt you but me." It was a warning. It should have sent Julian running. But the fear of the man outside was sharp and chaotic. The fear Silas inspired was heavy, grounding, and strangely seductive. "Okay," Julian breathed. "Good," Silas said, stepping back. "First rule, you don't leave this apartment without me. Second rule, you do exactly what I say. Do we have an accord?" "Yes." "Then go shower. You smell like fear." The next 3 weeks were a blur of domestic surrealism. Julian Vane, who flinched when baristas asked for his name, was now living with a man who was clearly a high-ranking enforcer for a criminal syndicate. Silas Kincaid, Julian learned his last name from a discarded envelope, was a ghost. He left at odd hours, returning with bruised knuckles and the scent of gunpowder clinging to his clothes. He never explained where he went, and Julian, bound by a mix of gratitude and terror, never asked. But inside the apartment, the dynamic was suffocatingly intimate. Silas was possessive. He didn't just let Julian stay, he absorbed him. He cooked for Julian surprisingly delicate meals, seared salmon and saffron rice, and watched him eat with an intensity that made Julian's skin prickle. He controlled the environment completely. When Julian tried to work on his laptop, Silas would loom over him, critiquing his posture until Julian straightened up. Yet, amidst the control, there was safety. For the first time in his life, the noise in Julian's head quieted. There was no need to be anxious about decisions because Silas made them all. One evening, deep into the second week, a storm was raging outside. Julian was sitting on the rug in the living room, organizing Silas's chaotic collection of architectural magazines. A nervous tick he couldn't suppress. Silas was on the sofa, cleaning a disassembly of a Sig Sauer P226 on the coffee table. The smell of gun oil was heavy in the air. "You're shaking," Silas observed, not looking up from the slide mechanism he was polishing. Julian looked at his hands. They were trembling. "The thunder. Sounds like him." Banging on the door. Silas set the gun down. "Come here." Julian hesitated, then crawled over to the sofa. Silas didn't move to make space. He simply spread his legs, indicating Julian should sit on the floor between them. Julian settled there, resting his back against the sofa, effectively caged by Silas's massive thighs. Silas's hand, heavy and warm, descended onto Julian's head. He began to stroke Julian's hair, a rhythmic, proprietary motion. "He can't get in here, Julian. The door is reinforced steel. The windows are ballistic glass. You are in a fortress." "He's still out there," Julian whispered, leaning into the touch despite himself. "I saw him yesterday, across the street, watching the balcony." Silas's hand stilled in Julian's hair. His grip tightened slightly, just enough to be a threat. "Did he see you?" I think so. I looked out the curtain." Silas sighed, a rough sound. "I told you to stay away from the windows." "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't keep you safe. Obedience does." Silas shifted, his voice turning cold. "Perhaps I haven't been clear enough about the consequences of disobedience." Julian's breath hitched. "Silas, the man outside wants to break you," Silas said, his fingers tracing the shell of Julian's ear. "I don't like sharing my things. And make no mistake, Julian, you are mine now. You ate my food. You sleep in my bed. You live under my protection." "I'm not a thing," Julian protested weakly, though his heart hammered with a dark thrill. "Aren't you?" Silas leaned down, his face next to Julian's. "You sought out a monster to protect you from a wolf. What did you think the monster would demand in return?" Before Julian could answer, a loud buzz echoed through the apartment. The intercom. Silas's eyes snapped to the screen on the wall. The feed from the lobby showed nothing but static. "He cut the feed," Silas said, his voice void of emotion. He stood up, the movement fluid and lethal. He reassembled the pistol in 3 seconds, the metallic click-clack deafening in the silence. "Stay here," Silas commanded. "Lock the bedroom door behind you." "Silas, no." Julian scrambled up. "Go!" Silas roared, the sound vibrating through the room. Julian ran. He scrambled into the master bedroom, slamming the heavy door and twisting the lock. He backed into the corner, sliding down the wall, clutching his knees. Outside, in the living room, there was silence. Then the sound of the front door opening. Julian waited for gunfire. He waited for shouting. But there was only a low murmur of voices. He strained his ears. "You have something that belongs to me," a voice sneered. It was the Stalker. How had he gotten up here? "You have 3 seconds to rephrase that," Silas's voice replied, calm, amused, and terrifyingly dark. "I know who you are, Kincaid." The Stalker spat. "The Syndicate's dog. You think they want you playing house with my pretty little archivist? Give him to me, and I won't tell the bosses where you're hiding." There was a pause, a heavy, suffocating silence. "You made a miscalculation," Silas said softly. "I'm not hiding from them. They're hiding from me." And as for Julian, a sickening crunch echoed through the apartment. The sound of cartilage and bone giving way under immense pressure. A wet gasp, then a heavy thud, like a sack of cement hitting the floor. "Julian is the only reason I haven't burned the city down out of boredom," Silas finished. Julian covered his mouth to stifle a sob. There were dragging sounds. The front door closed. Then silence. 10 minutes passed. 20. The bedroom door handle turned. Julian flinched, curling tighter into a ball. "Open it, Julian." It was Silas. His voice was calm, steady. Julian crawled over and undid the lock. The door swung open. Silas stood there. He had changed his shirt. His hands were scrubbed raw, smelling of bleach, but there was a singular droplet of red blood high on his cheekbone that he had missed. "Is he?" Julian couldn't finish the sentence. "He won't be coming back," Silas said. "The problem has been resolved." Julian looked at Silas, really looked at him. He saw the violence inherent in the man, the casual way he disposed of life. He knew, logically, he should be terrified. He should run. This man was a killer. But when Silas held out his hand, palm up, huge and scarred, Julian didn't look at the exit. He looked at the blood on Silas's cheek. Julian reached out. His trembling fingers brushed the droplet of blood away. Silas froze, his eyes widening slightly. He grabbed Julian's wrist, pulling him close, burying his face in Julian's neck, inhaling deeply. "You didn't run," Silas murmured against his skin. "I have nowhere to go," Julian whispered. "Liar," Silas growled, biting lightly at the junction of Julian's shoulder. "You have everywhere to go. You're choosing to stay." "Yes," Julian admitted, his hands clutching the back of Silas's shirt. "I'm choosing to stay." Silas pulled back, his eyes burning with possessive triumph. "Good, because the door is locked, and I seem to have misplaced the key." Julian looked at the monitors on the wall, seeing the empty hallway, the quiet city. He realized then that the Stalker had been the catalyst, but this consuming, dangerous gravity was the destination. He was the moth, and he had finally landed in the flame. "I don't need the key," Julian said softly, and that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Silas take absolute control, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a man who killed to protect you, even if he enjoyed it? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,